Well, I wanted to honor Dr. Garcia by providing a larger framework for Latino leadership. Because Dr. Garcia was, I'm from the Chicano generation, the 60s. And for us already, as we were doing things, Dr. Garcia was like a landmark figure. We stood on his shoulders, but he in turn, I have come to understand, stood on the shoulders of other giants, going all the way back. So I'd like to put a context around his contributions. And sometimes we need to understand how far back these shoulders go, and they go all the way back to the colonial era, when this was all part of, we sometimes call it Latin America. I love Carlos Fuentes' term, Indo-Afro-Oriento-Ibero-America. There was an indigenous substrate, but you had huge African population movements across the Atlantic. You had Iberian population movements. You had Asian population movements. And we've been mixing and marrying and having kids for 500 years. We're mestizos, okay? This is really important because by 1800, about 2/3 of us now in the United States had its version of Western society via Indo-Afro-Oriento-Ibero-America. That was the version of Western society they were familiar with. For example, the first medical library in what's now the United States was brought up by Juan de Oñate and established at San Juan de los Caballos in 1598. That's just a little bit north of Santa Fe. The first Western-style infirmary was established again in New Mexico in 1625, and this goes back quite a ways. You had a number of military health officers here in Texas. One of the most better known was Cristobal Larrañaga, 1785, functioned more over West Texas, El Paso, around through there. The first university-trained, licensed medical provider in Alta California was the Surgeon Major Pedro Prat, who came with Father Serra. Father Serra got sainthood, he didn't. But he had the policy charged to create the entire health infrastructure for this new version of Western society that was being created in Alta California. And about 10 years ago, I was at the Bancroft Archive, and by accident, I discovered California's oldest medical license. This is a license issued in Mexico City to a medical provider to practice medicine in California. Notice it's dated 1799. And it's got that nice handwriting, kind of looks like the Declaration of Independence, but if you read it really closely, it's in Spanish, because this was not given in Philadelphia or New York or Boston. For the nurses, we need to understand the lengthy role of Spanish-speaking public health nurses. The first smallpox vaccination campaign was ordered by the King of Spain in 1803, and a public health nurse, Isabel Sandala y Gomez, was in charge of that entire operation. They set sail from Spain, and you will notice that the effects arrived up here in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Alta California. We have been touched by Spanish-speaking providers. These are the shoulders upon which we have stood. But now let's move into the modern era, okay? And let's talk about Latino leadership in the making of American society. Not Mexican-American society, American society. Here are some Latino leadership contributions. That you can be a citizen of this country, irrespective of your racial background. Women have rights. You can live wherever you want to. You can go to school wherever you want. You can marry whomever you wish. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? These are Latino contributions to American society. I know, right? I can see some, you gotta be kidding me. I never heard of this before. Okay, let's talk. Let's talk. In fact, in medicine, we use mnemonic devices. So I have a mnemonic device for you to remember these Latino contributions. It's called El Cinco de Mayo. Now, we've all heard of Cinco de Mayo, right? So how can you possibly forget that as a mnemonic device? But of course, your first question, what the heck does Cinco de Mayo have to do with all of this? Well, that's a very good question. Cinco de Mayo, I would submit, is probably one of the best known Latino holidays in the United States. But have any of you ever been in Mexico on a Cinco de Mayo? And what happens in Mexico? Nothing. Okay, here is the mystery of the universe. Why is the Cinco de Mayo celebrated so much in the United States when it's not celebrated in Mexico? You ever stop to think about that? Okay, here is now where we're beginning our mnemonic device. And I understand some people have got to leave at 1 o'clock, so let me give you the 30-second version, okay? Then after that, you can stop taking notes, just put your pencils down and just enjoy the rest of the presentation. Here is the secret of Cinco de Mayo in 30 seconds. To begin with, Cinco de Mayo is not a Mexican holiday. I mean, we all think it is. It isn't, because if it were, they'd have huge Cinco de Mayo all over Mexico. Our Cinco de Mayo here, just a little pale imitation, but it's just the opposite. Man, we start a week before, the whole Semana de la Raza. We go a week after, and folks from Mexico, what are you guys celebrating? Okay, so it's not a Mexican holiday. What is it? And why am I bringing this up in regards to Dr. Hector P. Garcia? It's an American Civil War celebration created by Latinos here in the United States during the American Civil War, over the issues of the American Civil War. Freedom versus slavery, white supremacy versus racial equality, democracy versus elitist forms of government. That's why we celebrate Cinco de Mayo. What? Latinos in the American Civil War? Nah. Didn't you guys just all arrive 20 years ago? Hop the fence 20 years ago? No. We were here. We've been here since the beginning. And because Latinos were here, we have these civil rights that we love. Okay, so let's take this back to the beginning. Part of the Latino backstory to U.S. history. July 4th, 1776. We just finished celebrating 4th of July, American Declaration of Independence. And they had some really great ideas in this Declaration of Independence, such as, all men are created equal. Hey, that's pretty good. They're endowed by the Creator with certain rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hey, I'm down with that. So they fight the American War of Independence. They win it. They sit down to write the Constitution. And then somebody said, do you mean the slaves get life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? No, we didn't mean that. Well, didn't we just say all men are created equal? Well, not all races are equal. We only meant the white race. Whites get that, but if you're not white, you don't get that. And so that's how we started hardwired, and it got hardwired into our very first census, 1790. Whites over here, non-whites over there. And the non-whites they were most familiar with are African Americans and American Indians. Okay. Meanwhile, at the same time, in fact, we just had our 233rd anniversary on September 4th, 1781, a group of Indians, Africans, mestizos, mulattos, Asians, and a couple of Spaniards met and founded El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de los Ángeles del Río de Porciúncula, 90012. Just kidding about the last part. This is Los Angeles. That's the full name. Try putting that in your email address. And you can go to the Plaza Olvera, where they have this little plaque, that memorial, and they give, that was called the castas of all the founders, Indians, Africans, mestizos, mulattos, and Asians, and Iberians. Now, 1810, Mexico declares independence from Spain. Their independence is a little bit different from July 4th, 1776, because Father Hidalgo said, the first thing we're going to do when we become independent, we're going to abolish slavery. It's a horrible institution. How can we call ourselves a modern republic and hold our fellows in chains? Ridiculous. We're going to get rid of slavery. In fact, he said, I'm going to give the masters 10 days to free their slaves, or I'm putting the masters in jail. And he said, you know, this castas thing that the colonial Spain had done, dividing everybody up into 25 different groups, that's done with. Everyone will be a citizen of the Republic of Mexico, irrespective of racial background. Hey, that's pretty nifty, isn't it? 2 months later, his general, Jose Maria Morelos, announced the formation of the new government of the Republic of Mexico. He said, I publicly announce the establishment of the new government that will not label anyone as Indian, mulatto, or any casta, but rather all will be known generally as, and I love this, Americans. Not as Mexicans, as Americans. Well, don't we live in the Americas? Well, can't we be Americans? They certainly thought they were, okay? And Mexico wasn't unique. In fact, every single Latin American country, upon achieving independence from Spain, abolished slavery and opened up citizenship to all racial backgrounds. Every single one. Slightly different dates, slightly different variations. But this is a very Latin American set of constitutional values. No slavery, racial equality. Well, this is important because, see, this part used to be part of Mexico. These were the constitutional values that were the law of the land over here. So you had a couple generations, particularly in California that grew up, you had little Republic of Texas that interrupted over here. We'll get back to that. And this was just after a couple generations. Well, of course, we don't have slavery. Of course, everyone's a citizen. Of course, married women have rights. But came the Big Bang, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848. The U.S. Constitution moves west. And you have a collision of constitutions because the United States Constitution permitted slavery, denied citizenship to non-whites, and didn't even have the concept of women having any rights. I mean, the concept, particularly when a woman married, they suffered what was called legal death. They simply ceased to be. Well, the Latinos here said, hey, wait a minute. We have a different set of constitutional values. They're going to write a constitution. We're going to that California Constitutional Convention, and we're going to fight for our rights. And these descendants of Indians and Africans, mestizos, mulattoes, who were very clearly of Indian and African ancestry, went to Monterrey, and they sat down and said, okay, we're going to help to write the Constitución del Estado de California. Well, they also wrote a version in English, the California State Constitution. But the very first thing they had to say, hey, we've been here for a while. All laws, decrees, regulations, and provision which from their nature require publication shall be published in English and Spanish. And somehow those who think that Spanish is a foreign language in California. But they didn't stop there. Slavery was a big issue. And Latinos said, we got rid of that 1810. Don't even talk about bringing slavery into California. And California's Constitution did not allow slavery into the state of California. Then came the interesting one. Well, all the other state constitutions said white males are citizens. And former governors and generals and alcaldes and everybody else said, hey, we've been running the state for a few generations. Okay, so maybe don't look white. We want to be part of the state. And they had huge discussions. And finally, non-whites were allowed to become citizens in California. Okay, at that same time, Big Bang number 2 happens. Gold is discovered in California. You've all heard about the big gold rush. What you never talk about are the Spanish-speaking miners. But Latinos all over Mexico, Central and South America knew about the gold rush. Look, this is from the newspaper, Al Oro. Tens of thousands of miners walked from northern Mexico up into Alta California during the decade of the gold rush. Tens of thousands. I've done the demography. I can give you the data. Okay. What we hear is, didn't they disappear at that point? Primarily from Mexico. Thousands more took the ship from every port, from Guaymas in the north to Talcahuano in the south, all over Latin America, from Chile and from La Argentina and del Peru and Ecuador, Bolivia, Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, all from these Latin American republics with the constitutional tradition of no slavery, racial equality. Among them was a physician from Argentina, Dr. Manuel Rodriguez de Poli, who arrived in San Francisco in fall of 1849 just as the first cholera epidemic struck. He had plans to go up to the gold country. Miners are dying like flies. He's a physician. What does he do? Go up and dig for gold or take care of patients? Obviously, he takes care of patients out of his own pocket, out of his own grub stake. He opens up the first charitable hospital in San Francisco as part of the United States, takes care of the sick and the dying. He finally runs out of money the following year. He deeds that to the city of San Francisco, and that's the functional basis for San Francisco General Hospital. One of the first things Latinos getting into California want to do is to talk with one another, and they started publishing Spanish language newspapers. The first one being La Estrella de Los Angeles, published in 1851, La Crónica up in San Francisco, El Clamor Público back in Los Angeles. All these tens of thousands of 49ers met, they fell in love, they got married, and they had babies. Here are the Latino births in Los Angeles County. These are our data. You notice that curve goes straight up. Top curve is Latinos. And in California history books, Latinos just drop out. I guess they went back to Mexico. Maybe they died out. Maybe they assimilated. They're having babies, and they're publishing newspapers. But the babies that are being born are very different from their parents because they're a second generation. Here's one of them. Isn't he cute? This is Reginaldo Francisco del Valle. California had been a state for 4 years. Unlike his parents, he was a citizen at birth, and when he grew up, he was bilingual and bicultural all his life. Now, what did it mean to be a bicultural, bilingual Latino during the gold rush? Well, it meant he grew up celebrating Mexican Independence Day, 16th of September, but he's now a U.S. citizen. Let's add in 4 de Julio, 4th of July. That's bicultural. The Spanish language newspapers, yes, they published one page in Spanish. This page happens to be in Spanish. The next page, guess what, is in English. Does this sound familiar? Is this what we do here in Galveston to this day? Yes, this is where it begins. This is nothing new. And one of the things these Spanish language newspapers just had trouble getting their head around was, okay, we're now part of the United States. They tell us they have far superior institutions. Why do they allow slavery? And even worse, California jumped the line, was admitted as a free state without an accompanying slave state. Remember Missouri Compromise? Oh, the slave states were furious. Out of that, they got a whole series of strange things, the Fugitive Slave Act, for example. You got the popular sovereignty moving into Kansas, but basically had the effect of expanding slavery all over into what had been constitutionally free territory. And Latinos just, if you have great institutions, why do you allow slavery? And there were fugitive slaves in California. And Latinos are reading about the situation of these fugitive slaves, but California is a free territory, and all those issues about slavery. Interestingly enough, one of the biggest branches of the Underground Railroad went south into Mexico because Mexico was free territory. And of course, this issue of non-whites can't be citizens, again, coming out of the Latin American tradition where that had been gotten rid of in 1810. What do you mean only white? And by the way, what is white? Can you define white for me? Oh yeah, difficult. And the Dred Scott decision came down and Latinos read about it in Spanish. This is 1857. They knew what was going on in the Dred Scott decision, that according to the Constitution, Africans are considered only as property and they will never be able to attain the position of citizens. Now, if you happen to be Pio Pico, Indo-Afro-Ibero-American, former governor of Alta California, now, is he a citizen of the United States? Now look at that photograph. Clearly he's of Indian and African ancestry. Wait a minute, what happened? Wasn't there a Treaty Guadalupe Hidalgo? I mean, this is going to be really perplexing for Latinos. Well, these issues of slavery, freedom, race, citizenship tore at this country and finally exploded in the American Civil War. And Latinos knew all about the American Civil War. Every moment, for example, this iconic first battle of the ironclads, Monitor and the Merrimack. Well, here we have Latinos reading about los buques blindados, el Monitor y la Merrimack. They know every detail of construction. They know every detail of that battle. When the Emancipation Proclamation was declared in 1863, here they are, Latinos are reading it in Spanish and criticizing it, saying, Lincoln, that's great, but you only freed the slaves in the rebelling states. What about in the rest of the United States? When are you going to do that? So the issue was, what side do Latinos support in the American Civil War? Well, for Latinos, this is kind of a no-brainer. What were the issues? The Confederacy very clearly fighting to maintain slavery. Read the Confederate Constitution, read the Declaration of Causes of Secession. Slavery is why they seceded. They wanted to protect it forever and always. They were fighting to maintain white supremacy, fighting to maintain elite rule. The United States, by comparison, was starting to move in the direction of other Latin American constitutions. Let's talk about no slavery. Let's talk about racial equality. Let's talk about democracy. Well, in the American West, Latinos from all over say, finally, you're joining the rest of America. Let's get rid of slavery. Let's get rid of white supremacy. Latinos said, we're supporting Lincoln. We're supporting the Union. We're supporting the United States. We're supporting freedom and democracy. And not just with words. Many Latinos joined the fighting units. This is Major Jose Ramon Pico, organized 4 units of Spanish-speaking United States cavalry from San Jose, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles. And here's our artist's reconstruction of the Spanish-speaking United States cavalry chasing some English-speaking Confederate bandits in the foothills just south of Monterey. In New Mexico, Major Rafael Chacon likewise organized units of Spanish-speaking cavalry. The first admiral of the United States Navy, David Farragut, was a bilingual, bicultural Latino. But Texas is a little bit more nuanced because Texas went with the slave states, okay? Nonetheless, from what we've been able to figure out, many Latinos supported the Union, as did many German immigrants. And you had Union Tejanos fighting for the Union here in Texas. So here's the situation. Latinos realizing, if the Confederacy wins with slavery and white supremacy, where does that leave us? We have to support the United States. We have to support Lincoln against the Confederacy. And then the very first battle of Bull Run, guess what? My God, the Confederates won and the Union lost. And in major battle after major battle, they kept reading about Confederate victories and Union losses. And Latinos began to ask, oh my God, could things possibly get any worse? Well, okay, you've studied rhetoric. This is a rhetorical question. The answer is yes. The question is, how? Well, here's how they get worse. Enter Louis Napoleon III, Emperor of the French. He loved the Confederates. French banks floated huge bond issues to support the Confederate dollar. So as he saw it, my friends need help, his friends being the Confederates. And it just so happened the Confederacy now had a 1,500-mile border with the Republic of Mexico that had abolished slavery and thrown open citizenship to everybody. The Confederates wanted Mexico to allow them to run arms, goods across the border. Benito Juarez, 100% Zapotec Indian, said, "Are you kidding? No way." Mexico wasn't willing to play ball. Napoleon had a better idea. I happen to have an unemployed relative, Maximilian of Austria. Guess what? Who needs that pesky Mexican Constitution? Who needs democracy? Let's get rid of all of that. Let's put my guy in, and then he can make nice with the Confederates. So he sends the troops into Mexico early in 1862. And of course, Latinos are reading, and this is no big secret, everybody knew this. So the troops start marching towards Mexico City, and Latinos realize, well, now we've been supporting the North against the Confederacy. Now we need to support Mexico against the French, because the French and the Confederacy are very, very close. So the French are marching. They're about 3 days march away from Mexico City, just about as McClellan's about ready to launch his ill-fated Peninsular Campaign, where he just gets shellacked and Robert E. Lee's star rises. But before they can get to Mexico City, get rid of democracy and the Constitution, they have to go through a town called Puebla. Now, what do we commemorate on the Cinco de Mayo? Battle of Puebla. But why is it important to us? Think of it in the context of the American Civil War. You're a Latino here. You're a mestizo. You're a mulatto. You're clearly not white. Whoa, something big is going on here. So on the morning of May 5th, 1862, the French troops thought, man, in 2 weeks we're in Mexico City, out Juarez, in Maximilian, go Confederacy. It took 3 weeks for the news to arrive from Mexico City to California. And when it did 3 weeks later, the headlines were, "Viva Mexico! Viva Zaragoza!" The French did not make it to Mexico City. They were roundly stopped at Puebla, thrown back to the strongholds at Orizaba and Veracruz. And for Latinos, it was, wow, we've been hearing all this disastrous stuff. Finally, the Army of Freedom and Democracy, just happened to be the Mexican Army, won a big one. And there was no if, ands, or but. They won, hands down, no question. And there were spontaneous celebrations by the end of May 1862 all up and down California. Here's one from the mining town of Columbia. It's right now threatened by one of those wildfires, where we have celebrated our triumph over the French. And they're all the way up in the gold country. We have celebrated with cannon salutes and banquets. So Latino leadership realized, okay, here is some good news. We need to organize the communities to remind people why we're in the Civil War, and we need to raise support both for Juarez and for Lincoln. So they established this custom of celebrating every Cinco de Mayo parades all through the American West to remind people, here is where Latinos stand on these issues. We support freedom, we oppose slavery. We support racial equality, we oppose white supremacy. We support democracy, we oppose elitist forms of government. So here we have Cinco de Mayo up in Camp Calaveritas, up in the Gold Country, up in Calaveras County. Here's Cinco de Mayo in Los Angeles. Here is Cinco de Mayo in Stockton, California, during the Civil War. Cinco de Mayo in San Francisco. Cinco de Mayo in Hornitos, that's up in the mining country, up in Mariposa County. Cinco de Mayo in San Andres. Hey, Cinco de Mayo in Sutter Creek. I bet you got Sutter Creek wine here in a cheap store. Okay, hey, but they used to do Cinco de Mayo before they did cheap wine. Cinco de Mayo in Virginia City, Nevada. They were doing Cinco de Mayo up in Oregon, in the mine of New Almaden. In fact, this year, for the first time, they had a conference. I participated at Gettysburg Battlefield as military historians began to understand, wait a minute, if the Mexicans hadn't won at the Battle of Puebla and the French had moved in, we might not have even been around for the Battle of Gettysburg, or if we had been and the Confederates had had access to French powder and arms, because it was Battle of Gettysburg was a very iffy thing. Maybe Puebla has something to do with the American Civil War. And as more, and I'm not a military historian, I'm a social historian, and I'm thinking, wow, this has an impact for the United States. And there was a Tejano connection, by the way. Remember, Texas was part of the Confederacy. A lot of Latinos fought with the Union. One of the more famous Unionist Latinos was Juan Cortinas. Remember the Cortinas Wars of the late 1850s, where he's a sworn enemy of the Texas Rangers? Well, when the Civil War broke out, guess what? The Rangers were with the Confederates, and Cortinas was with the Union. In fall of 1864, Cortinas had taken his troops across the river. This is right by Matamoros. He was on the Mexican side fighting the French, as the French were trying to move in on Juarez. The French's buddies, the Confederates on the other side of the river, started shooting at Cortinas to provide support to the French. Cortinas got angry. He whipped the French. He splashed his troops across the river. He whipped the Confederates. He rides into Brownsville, raises the U.S. flag. And Latinos in California are reading all about it. In fact, they had huge celebrations when the news arose of the defeat of the French and the separatists by our valiant General Cortina. This is in Jackson, up in Amador County. Here's the president of the Junta Patriotica Mexicana in Los Angeles giving a speech about the triumph of General Cortinas, as proved by the poor luck with which the rebels went to fight General Cortinas at the Rio Grande. And they had parades all through California and Nevada in honor of what was happening here in Texas that was split over the issues of the Civil War. Well, thanks to the support of Latinos, Juarez was able to resist the French, not only with monetary support, but a lot of Latinos went south and joined the Mexican Army. That was another army of freedom and democracy. This is one of General Mariano Vallejo's son, Vladislav Vallejo, who was a captain in the Mexican Army. He was one of Juarez's personal bodyguards. When Lincoln had to run for a re-election in 1864, it still wasn't clear he was going to win. It still wasn't clear that the Confederacy was ever going to lose. In fact, remember, Lincoln had written out sort of his letter of resignation, sort of thinking, I'm not going to win. The Civil War, okay, here's what I tried to do. Latinos said, we can't let this, and they put their weight behind Lincoln. I love this campaign poster. Para presidente, Abraham Lincoln. And look at the flags that illustrate that. The Mexican flag and the U.S. flag, because those were the flags of freedom and democracy. Well, finally, after years of war, in 1865, the Confederate Army surrendered. 2 years later, Emperor Maximilian is captured, he's tried, sentenced, and executed. And Latino leadership started to play a real role as the United States Constitution gradually began to change. Finally, with 13th Amendment, slavery was no longer permitted. The non-whites were allowed to become citizens with the 14th Amendment. Married women, we still have the ERA out. We're still 3 states short, but let's get there. Eventually, we're going to look like the rest of Latin America. And some of my friends have asked me, you've talked about Cinco de Mayo in California. When did they start celebrating Cinco de Mayo in Texas? And up until 2 days ago, I could have said, I have no idea. I have found a clue. A clue. This is a recent book called Tejanos en Gray, actually about Texans who fought with the Confederacy. One of them was Dr. Manuel Iturre. Writing in the middle of May 1865, the Confederacy is crumbling. Lee has surrendered. The president had just been captured. He's still in a unit that still is kind of coherent, but his wife wrote him, and he's writing back. This is May 1865. He says, Dear Elenita, you tell me that the 5th of the present, the 5th of May, the Mexicans had a dance, and that it was very beautiful. Well, why would Mexicans in San Antonio be doing a dance on Cinco de Mayo at the end of the Civil War unless it was Cinco de Mayo? This could be the first documented Cinco de Mayo in Texas, again, as part of the Civil War, and in fact occurring just weeks before Juneteenth. These two may be far more linked than we had possibly thought. Latino academic leadership, just really quick, remember this little kid that we saw, first generation bilingual bicultural? He grew up, went on to the California State Senate, President Pro Tem of the Senate. While he was there, he single-handedly was the one who established and created the institution that grew up and became UCLA, thanks to Latino academic leadership. And he was always involved in Cinco de Mayo. Unfortunately, the Civil War wasn't the end, because right after the Civil War, the U.S. went back and resegregated itself on different principles, segregated facilities, which also now began to officially include Mexicans, Latinos, and we became completely resegregated by the 1920s. And here's where Latino leadership helped to desegregate a resegregated America. The public schools, Mendez v. Westminster, by the way, Felicitas was Puerto Rican. A Puerto Rican lady did the precedent for Brown v. Board of Education. Miscegenation laws that outlawed marriages against different races. Well, Sylvia Perez wanted to marry her fiance who was an African American. She sued the LA County Board of Registrar. That began to break down miscegenation laws. And of course, public facilities. Dr. Hector P. Garcia is probably the key figure in desegregating these public facilities here in the United States, both at the VA as well as the burial of Felix Longoria. So these were the shoulders that we stand. We stand on Dr. Garcia's. He stood on other shoulders all the way back. I was at a National Hispanic Medical Association meeting, and I took this shot, and it turns out, woo, here are the Cinco Viejos from UNM, UCSF, UCLA, Stanford, University of Texas. You recognize them all. And we're kind of ambling off into the sunset. And we really need to be thinking of Alexander and the LMSAs. You're the next generation. This is the pre-medical group at UCLA CCM. And I love this. At random, they're the officers of this group. And you can see the faces of Indigenous America, African America, Asian America, Ibero-America. Just in the officers, that was the past of the United States. It is the future of the United States. And this is Latino leadership in American health and medicine. So if people ask you, so what did this guy come from UCLA to talk to you about? Just think mnemonic device, Viva el Cinco de Mayo, Viva el Dr. Garcia. Thank you very much.